And yes, we are live. All right. So maybe what we could do is have everybody go through a short introduction, and then maybe just banter around for 5 or 10 minutes till such time as maybe more traffic comes in, and then we could give you guys the floor. Does it make sense?
Absolutely.
Sure. And if it'd be helpful, maybe this is David Johnston. I'll go first. I've got the first hard stop actually coming up in about 15 or 20 minutes with a family event, but I'll be leaving you guys with Paul to do the deep technical dive. So it'd be helpful. I can sort of go through my perspective, and then we can do some questions, and then you guys can go deeper with Paul.
Oh, good. If that's the case, then we can hold off our sort of one-liner thingy after you finish, because you have a hard stop in 15 or 20 minutes. So the floor is yours then.
Okay, great. Well, really appreciate the invite to talk with you guys today. I'm really excited and passionate about this whole topic of crypto 2.0, the idea of extending the blockchain to a whole new host of use cases. Just thinking about it before this call, I would almost describe it as we're having sort of a renaissance in different proofs that people are creating to extend far beyond go deeper with Paul. That's been pioneered by.
If that's the case, then we can hold off our sort of one moment, please.
Wait 1 second. People need to turn be mute.
The floor is yours then.
Okay, great.
If you're not talking.
All right, great. Well, I was just saying that it almost feels like we've got a renaissance going on in the types of proofs that people are creating, cryptographic proofs far beyond proof of work. I would almost describe it as we're having sort of a renaissance in different proofs that people are creating to extend far beyond go deeper with Paul. That's been pioneered by. All right, great. I was just saying that it almost feels like we've got a renaissance going on in the types of proofs that people are creating, cryptographic proofs far beyond proof of work. I would almost describe it as we're having sort of a renaissance in different.
So are we, is everything going on over here?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, so we can hear you now, David.
Okay. Where did I get cut off? Now you're on mute, but that's all right. I was just saying that my big hope is that by the end of the year, we'll be in a position where we have decentralized compute, bandwidth, and storage, and we can use that as the underlying infrastructure to build a whole host of generalized applications on top of the Bitcoin technology. So that's really what I'm excited about when I think about how to develop new applications. The big limiting factor right now is, does the consensus mechanism, does the proof that I need in order to build the application exist yet? Or does that need to be developed in order for the application to exist? So when I talk about infrastructure, that's why I talk about these very low-level applications, because we're at the point where we have very basic proofs that we can use when building these decentralized applications. And so, what we're seeing is people are sort of pushing the boundaries for what they can cryptographically prove, right? Ethereum is doing things essentially with decentralized compute. Storage and MadeSafe are doing things where they're showing proof of actually storing a data file. And then there are other projects like Open Garden and Skyhook and others that are working on bandwidth, and even folks trying to do proof of relay for enabling privacy through Tor. So there are a lot of exciting applications that I think are going to get unleashed, but we have to do the hard work of building the cryptographic proofs that make them possible. So this is part of why I asked Paul to join us for the conversation today, and just sort of to set the table. He's the core developer and the founder of Notary Chains, and it's a proposal to essentially extend the Bitcoin blockchain and allow a whole host of new use cases, whether it's higher number of transactions or doing transactions at an extremely cheap rate. These are the extensions of the core blockchain technology that get me really excited, and I think are sort of what's going to bring Bitcoin into the mainstream, because it's going to allow us to attract and engage people that don't care about merchant payments, and they don't care about remittances, but they care about paying less for Dropbox type services, and they don't want to pay AT&T $100 or $200 a month, right? So I think if we're going to get beyond, and really into the mainstream, it requires that we expand the utility of today's cryptographic systems. I compare it today to the early days of the internet. Most people didn't care about the internet until it had a service that they were passionate about, right? The gold bug didn't care about the internet until there were all these great websites with the price of gold where he could check it in real time. Or the guitar player didn't care about the internet until there were all these wonderful videos and audio files of other guitarists sharing their skills, right? So that's sort of my overall view of the whole crypto space, is that this isn't too early. In fact, this is the work that extends the applicability of these type of systems to a much broader and generalized audience. So that's sort of my approach and thinking to this, and so I'm pouring all of my energy into how do we expand these existing cryptographic proofs, how do we solve the really hard problems in cryptography, and putting as much funding and bandwidth into that effort as we possibly can. So that's what I'm doing with the Decentralized Applications Fund. That's sort of my full-time focus in getting involved in projects like Storage or Ethereum or Swarm or Notary Chains. And that's why I invited Paul, because he's got a really extremely in-depth technical view of sort of what's evolving with these different proofs. He's leveraging them for his own project, and I think it'll be really interesting today to dig in and talk with Paul and kind of go deep on what's possible, where the technology's at today, and what are the next things that need to get developed to make a lot of the applications we all want to build possible. So I'll just stop there and let Paul introduce himself. But that's sort of my 2 cents on where things are headed and how I think about building these projects.
Paul, one moment. Just before you start, could I just have a question for David?
Sure.
Could you tell us specifically what does DApps Fund do for those? You've got a bunch of company names or DACs or DApps on your webpage. What's your role? What do you do for them? How do you assist them? We understand that that's something really that you're passionate about, but in specific, how does DApps Fund work?
So we essentially work as a traditional venture capitalist, at least traditional in the model. We're a fund that's purely been raised in cryptocurrency. Mm-hmm. So we've taken Bitcoin and Mastercoin and other cryptocurrencies into the fund, and we invest those into these decentralized applications. So we purely work with projects that are open source, mm-hmm. that have their own digital tokens, that have their own cryptographic consensus mechanism, or utilize another platform's cryptographic consensus mechanism, and are completely decentralized. So those are our 4 criteria for what we're interested in getting involved with. So again, open source, digital token, decentralized and consensus mechanism, and we put cryptographic currencies to work in those projects. We'll help people find developers. We'll help connect them with other platforms and projects. We sort of do everything that you would imagine a traditional supporter of a project would do. We just try to empower them with as much bandwidth, engineers, and support as we possibly can.
Got it. I mean, I think your website clearly details the criteria that you have. But my question is one step deeper. I mean, most of these DApps, do they actually have a specific traditional C corporation or an LLC and a group of founders who sort of own the shares of that corporation? Is that what you fund, or what kind of funding is it?
So we're not interested in equity. We're not interested in shares or sort of any traditional security. We are purely interested in the digital token associated with the application. So if it's Ethereum, I'm only interested in the Ether. If it's made safe, I'm interested in the safe coins, and so on and so forth. And so the model is essentially, people say, well, how does that work? Well, the model is essentially like getting into Bitcoin back when Bitcoin was $1, right? If Bitcoin is $1, I want to buy as many Bitcoins as I possibly can. I want to help Bitcoin find core developers. I want to encourage applications to build on top of Bitcoin. So we're looking at these really early stage projects, and we get involved even when things are white papers and it has one developer and he's come up with sort of a brilliant approach for things. We like to get involved really, really early, but we're purely interested in the tokens. No equity, no shares.
So your investment comes in by the purchase of a set of tokens of this DApp that meets the set of criteria that you've outlined on your webpage. Well,
exactly.
Exactly.
And some of them hold public crowd sales, some hold private crowd sales. It really depends on the model and the stage that the group is at. So we'll get involved however we can get involved, but typically it's through a public crowd sale or when they do their launch. We participate on the same basis as everybody else, and we just want to sort of support those projects as much as we can. But we usually also go deeper. We do informational reports. So I'll do a 4, 5, 6, 7-page write-up on each project that we evaluate, their team, their technology, their economics, their challenges, their technical hurdles, all that sort of thing. And I'll usually release it to all different community groups like the BitAngels community or others that want to know more about the project. And so I spend a lot of our, the benefit of doing this deep dive on our part is to get really close to the teams and be able to put out real, substantive analysis of these projects when they launch.
2 questions. These reports, are they public, or are you only for the specific audiences that you publish them? And the second question is, these investments that you make, do you have a group of LPs that invest in the DApps fund, or is it just you and a couple of other high net worth individuals? How does that work?
Sure. So all the reports, the informational reports, can be found publicly listed on the BitAngels Google group. So that's one of the biggest communities. There's 400 or 500 BitAngels in the group, and all of the documents are on Google Docs, and they're publicly available to anybody that has the link. So you can just go to the Google group and search for informational report and find all of the informational reports. People usually end up reposting them to Twitter and other public sources like Pastebin and things like that. So yeah, all those reports are available. In fact, I'm thinking of adding them to my own blog, sort of as a catalog of all the major projects and the analysis that we've done on all of them. As for the Decentralized Applications Fund, it has limited partners, and they all originally came in March of this year, and they're all essentially guys that invested early in Bitcoin, Mastercoin, these other cryptocurrencies, and have decided that they want to reinvest in the ecosystem and put their money back into these platforms to make them grow, which is really cool. It's essentially the same thesis as we built the BitAngels group with, which is a distributed group of individual angels that was launched last year, and the whole thesis was, guys, we all have a pile of Bitcoin. We all believe in this community and then in this technology. Let's reinvest our Bitcoin in order to make these projects successful and get it to mass adoption and things like that. So that was a really successful model, and we're sort of trying to take that to the next step with the Decentralized Applications Fund, as we're getting bigger investors involved and getting them to pour more work to more capital to work. And my job as the general partner, as the managing director, is really to find the best technologies. I work on it full time. I find the best technologies that I can. I attend all the conferences, and I really try to engage sort of the most powerful technologies in the space, and then get them the funds that they need. So that's sort of my mandate.
Great. Do you have a fund size? Is it public, or do you just raise money as you need it?
We have a fund size. I think it's been published a few times when the fund launched back in March. So I think it's public that we're a fairly small fund. It's between 5,000 and 10,000 Bitcoin worth of cryptocurrencies. So that's not all in Bitcoin. It's in a variety of cryptocurrencies. And we're probably going to be a much shorter fund than you would typically see. A lot of time funds are 7 to 10 years. For us, this is like a 18 to 24 month sprint. So our goal is to deploy all of our capital in the next 6 to 12 months. We're already 6 months in. Okay. And the goal is to then manage those tokens and then distribute them to the limited partners. So that's our approach.
So let me just go around the room and see if anybody else has questions. I think I've got my questions answered. Solomon, Zaki. Well, whilst they're thinking this through, I'd like to thank you, David, for taking the time. I know you sort of got an engagement to go to in a short while, but that was extremely informative. And we'll definitely now go with Paul and try to really understand notary chains. I think it's a fantastic concept. Digital artifacts on the blockchain forever. You hear about these Valentine's Day messages and stuff, but I think notary chains really formalizes it.
Right, and for me, it's interesting what Paul is doing, and it took me a while to wrap my head around it. Especially with the name notary chains, you think of the notary application, but he's sort of building the underlying platform that you could really do anything with that involves proof of existence, which is what you're referring to, hashing a file and placing the record in the blockchain. But he's taken it a lot further now with proof of process, which is, okay, I'm going to prove that this record, was this record at this time, and I can make an update, and now, it's this future record. And having chains where essentially I can then, aggregate lots of these records and put a single hash into the blockchain to represent all of those records, and then come back and be able to do a proof of audit, which is really, really critical. I encourage you guys to dig into that part especially, because that really opens it up to anything that I want to do off-chain transactions, lots of them, record it into the blockchain, but during that process, cryptographically be able to audit the other servers involved, so that we have a high level of confidence of what's taking place. So yeah, I think of it as the extension of the blockchain technology.
Cool. Yeah, so I think for now, in terms of questions for you, we've pretty much got all of our questions answered here. So what I could do is, before you leave, we could just have this 1 minute sort of go around the room kind of thing and introduce ourselves. So
let's do that.
Yeah, I'll start with the folks here because the other ones you guys don't know, and we kind of know a little bit about you. So maybe McLean Wilkinson, if you could maybe just talk in a little.
Sure. So, hi guys, my name is McLean Wilson. Looking on sort of various sort of super early idea stage things in Bitcoin and Ripple and other protocols.
That's okay. So Solomon.
Yeah, my name is Solomon, and so I'm also not a Bitcoin enthusiast, and then it was interesting that all the underlying technology of Bitcoin as well as other type of uses of Bitcoin. There was other type of uses, but.
And then we have Zaki.
Hi, I'm Zaki. I do a lot of privacy activism work and sort of building on blockchain technology. I'm very interested in all things crypto.
Cool. So I'm going to do a Gaddy pitch. I just heard about the Gaddy pitch. It's so it starts off with, well, you know how pharmaceutical fraud is a big deal, it's a $30 billion problem. What we do is we provide manufacturers a QR code that lets them track their product through the supply chain. In fact, we've been profiled in Tim Swanson's recent book where we discuss how we do it and we meet the FDA-mandated e-pedigree directive. So this is the structure of the Gaddy pitch. You know how, and then you say something, and the next thing is what we do, and the last thing is in fact. Okay, so with that, Paul.
Okay.
Where's yours?
So you would like the Gaddy pitch from me. I'm not so sure I can do it so well off the cuff, but
do whatever. Do whatever is comfortable. I'm just
Sure. The notary chains evolved from me wanting to do some fairly complex applications that I wanted to secure with the Bitcoin blockchain. And then as I analyzed those applications, I realized that I'm actually kind of missing some services that I would like to have. And then I went down in these layers until I eventually hit the basement, essentially with proof of existence. Because basically, almost any distributed application requires the ability to prove that a digital artifact of some sort existed at some point in time. Okay, and that's really the very, very bottom layer of so many different kinds of applications. The next step is to consider that a digital artifact represents something in the real world, like a birth certificate or a driver's license or a certificate of authentication, title, many possibilities, audio files, video files, all kinds of things. And those things are not, all those digital artifacts are not fixed in time. They're not fixed in configuration or quality or anything else. And in the real world, we sign titles over to new owners when we sell a vehicle or a house. A certificate of authentication could be revoked if it turns out that the artifact isn't actually authentic. New evidence could be found, and you may need to revoke a certificate. Even access as an employee to a building makes total sense within one context, but should your job change or should your company be sold to another company, or maybe they sell the building, then your access is rescinded. So the real world is a very dynamic, complex thing, and the idea of notary chains is to provide a protocol stack for Bitcoin 2.0 type applications that allow them to use the facilities that they need to implement those applications, and not make any not build in any kind of preconceived limits or artifacts that would constrain the way someone may want to create a Bitcoin 2.0 application, because there isn't any possible way we as a designer of a protocol can anticipate what a user may need to do to support their application. So that's kind of the basis of notary chains and where I'm coming from. I could go into a lot more depth, but I would rather leave it to here and go into depth with some conversation, so I don't bore you guys with information that you're not interested in.
So, you know, at different meetups, we've all discussed this, and all of us see a need. So I think what you're doing is, you know, bang on. Currently, you have essentially, I guess, Namecoin, and we did do a deep dive with Namecoin, which adds data, metadata, to their blockchain. So what we'd like to do is to sort of get a little deeper. So maybe if I could ask you a few questions, and that would help out. My first question is, at what stage is your project? Do you have working code? Are you using an existing blockchain? Do you have protocol sort of thinking through? I mean, where are you at as far as notary chains goes?
Well, we have some prototype code that's running on top of the test net for Bitcoin right now, and it basically creates the notary blocks described in the white paper and places the hashes of those notary blocks into the Bitcoin test net. And so basically we're at a stage where we have prototyped a fair amount of code. We've spent a fair amount of time bringing team members on board, because while writing the code is very, very interesting and fun if you're a programmer, making sure that you aren't painting yourself into a corner cryptographically or security-wise is a much more difficult process. And so we have been building the team, and we have a couple of us that are full-time, Brian Deary and myself, and we brought on some advisors like Manuel from Proof of Existence out of Argentina, and Stephen Sprague from Rivets is advising us. And of course, Stephen Sprague is probably one of the top cryptographic people in the country, and employs a lot of highly talented cryptographic people. And as we progress forward, we're gonna have them review our designs. I expect to have the proof of existence layers of the protocol in production by the end of September, and that will allow you to put a cryptographic signature in the Bitcoin blockchain, and it'll also have the entry layer, which allows you to put metadata with that, with any amount of metadata, and digitally sign that and put that into the blockchain. The actual implementation of the notary chains will be done by the end of the year, and I'm looking at the first quarter of 2015 to finalize all of the federated server concepts and ideas and implementation. So that's our timeline.
You mentioned right now it sits atop the testnet Bitcoin blockchain, and then you have talked about a notary block. So are you counterparty-like or master coin-like?
Well, have you seen Virtual Notary? There's a website called Virtual Notary, and what they're doing is they collect hashes and they create essentially a block. They hash that block, and that's the hash that goes into the Bitcoin blockchain. So you're not putting hashes of digital artifacts directly into the Bitcoin blockchain. There's one level of indirection. You group them into a block, you hash that block, and you put that hash into the blockchain, and you push that, what I call a notary block. You push that notary block to anyone that wants to download it. And in our system, we'll have some federated servers and auditors, and they'll be downloading all of these notary blocks and auditing them to ensure that they're all properly constructed.
Okay. So on the testnet right now, I mean, how do you put this hash? Is it in the op return, or do you actually, create a number of output addresses that kind of, are hashes to your? What's the kludge you're using to put the data Bitcoin block?
The kludge that I will be using is op return. Right now, what I've got is a multi-sig encoding that puts the hash into a transaction, a multi-sig transaction, very similar to what Counterparty and Mastercoin do to encode information.
Why did you not, I guess, make a design decision to go with your own blockchain? Just curious.
Well, none of the blockchains outside of Bitcoin have anywhere near the hash power securing and validating their ledger as Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the proof of work champion out there. And the idea of notary chains is to put very, very, very few entries into the blockchain, but really have no limit to how many entries are secured by those entries. So I could be accepting thousands, even millions of entries per 10 minutes, and that single hash going into the Bitcoin blockchain secures them as well as if all those hashes were directly into the Bitcoin blockchain. It's mathematically just as difficult to come up with a hash of hashes as it is to come up with a hash of a single artifact.
Got it.
So this is about eliminating Bitcoin blockchain bloat or pollution, or like Luke Jr. likes to say, raping and assaulting the blockchain. Because Mastercoin and Counterparty and a lot of other applications want to be secured by the Bitcoin blockchain, but they really don't have any interest in creating Bitcoin transactions per se. They're simply using Bitcoin transactions to secure information with the Bitcoin blockchain.
So could we go a little deeper into the notary block? You said it's going to be a federated server structure with auditors. So it's really your own blockchain, and every block that you make on your own blockchain, a hash of that you're going to put on the Bitcoin blockchain. And you're doing that because Bitcoin has the highest amount of hash power going as blockchains go. Is that?
That is one way to look at it. I don't think that it's not necessarily a blockchain, because the structure that you may have in the notary chain world may not look like a blockchain. It may look more like a tree. And in some sense, we have some similarities to side chains and tree chains. Those proposals for the Bitcoin protocol. But unlike those proposals, notary chains requires no change to the Bitcoin protocol, and in fact, with the use of op return, we can have no effect in terms of bloating the in-memory representation required by clients. So we want to inherit the security of Bitcoin, but we don't want to burden it with all of our transactions.
Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
My name's, I didn't introduce myself before. My name's Manu. I'm working on a project, an architecture called Proof of Human.
Proof of what?
Proof of Human. Proof of Human.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit about that later, perhaps. But just a quick question. So, if you're going to have this federated model that's going to be storing this sort of side chain or tree chain, how are you going to incentivize the maintenance of that network? Are you going to have some sort of token yourself for fueling and incentivizing people to run servers to power that?
Yeah, we're using a token to drive the system, and the token provides rewards to the federated servers for doing their thing and to auditors for doing their thing. We're still constructing the incentives, but most of the tokens, just like you would in any other like Ethereum, any other blockchain or Bitcoin, most of the rewards will end up going to those people running the system, maintaining the system.
Are you writing your own code base for this, or are you going to leverage off like MadeSafe sort of code base or something like that?
Well, MadeSafe could be a very good solution for us publicizing and putting into the permanent record the notary chain blocks, the notary blocks that we create. We're initially going to use BitTorrent to distribute those because that way I'm not waiting on MadeSafe. But if MadeSafe becomes real fast enough, then maybe we'll just do MadeSafe, or we'll do both. It's not like they're mutually exclusive. Even the Bitcoin blockchain is being distributed with BitTorrent.
How would you tie an incentive structure into a BitTorrent style distribution of data?
Well, the BitTorrent, just like with Bitcoin, BitTorrent is a way to grab blocks, and the reason you want those blocks could vary. If you are performing audits and seeking an audit reward, then you're going to have to download the blocks in order to perform the audit. If you try to fake the audit, then your audit will be provably incorrect, and you will lose your ability to audit. So there's some reason for you have to have the blocks to perform an audit. And if you want the blocks simply to prove your chain, Notary Chains is designed so that the audit path is from your artifact through any of the layers, the entry layers and whatnot, to a notary block to the Bitcoin blockchain. And that path is all you need, because if your hash is here and your hash is there and your hash is there, and all these things check out all the way to Bitcoin blockchain, you've proven your ledger. You've proven the existence of that artifact. And the same sort of construct works with the chains. If you have all of the underlying blocks that prove your chain, you can prove the validity of your entire chain without downloading everything. So the idea with Notary Chains is to limit how much information you have to prove your chain is correct.
So the auditors are kind of like the miners. They're the kind of workers in the system.
Yes. You can think of this as a proof by audit as opposed to a proof of share or proof of work.
Cool. Thank you.
But you're inheriting the proof of work from the Bitcoin blockchain. I don't think there's anything like proof of work to prove the history. Once your history is recorded, it's just a fact. You just have it. But the most important thing about the audits is to prove that until the ledger is recorded forever, that process is all correct and all the entries there are correct.
Can you just go deeper on can you just explain more on what the concept, because originally I didn't quite catch the concept yet. So
well, the main concept can be thought by a simple example. Let's give you a simple example. Suppose you have a security cam and you want to have the highest level of proof in court concerning that security cam should its information be needed to prove your position in a trial or something. Okay, then with a security cam with a trusted computing chip, you can prove via the signature of the video frame that a video was produced by a particular security camera. And then if the hash periodic hashes of that video are placed into a notary chain tied to that security camera, you could have proof of timestamp, essentially, of when the video was taken and that the video has not been altered. So at the point in time that you want to submit your video for evidence, you can prove this is the camera that took the video was taken when, according to the timestamp, and the video has not been altered. Okay, so that's and because a camera is continuously taking video, you need a chain of these signatures to prove a ongoing process. Okay. There are. Go ahead.
Keep going. Yes, please.
Okay. Another way of thinking about notary chains is to observe that there are many cases where multiple parties interact, but those parties have no system of record that can be relied upon to provide a history of those interactions. If I have a contract with AT&T and Deloitte, and I'm the state of Texas, right? And I have these this complex working arrangement with a lot of different business processes. I have a very difficult time proving the process of the interactions between these parties, especially if none of these parties trust each other to maintain the system of record. You follow what I'm saying with the system of record?
Yes.
Yeah. So if instead you're using notary chains to back up a database of these interactions, and the parties agree to digitally sign key milestones, then you end up with a perfectly valid and cryptographically provable timeline of the interactions between the parties and what the parties have shared with each other as they went along. And I had a lawyer point out to me some weeks ago that 40 to 60% of a time in a civil suit between business parties tends to be consumed with the timeline, establishing the timeline, what events occurred when and where and how, with a lot of arguments about those timelines. And notary chains could provide a mechanism to provide discipline, because nobody goes into these business relationships, well, at least I won't say nobody, but very few parties go into these relationships fully expecting to defraud the other parties or to not abide by their part of the agreement. But stuff happens and people fail and projects go sideways, right? And so if you've got a timeline of the events in a system of record that nobody can argue with, then you can go immediately to how you are going to resolve this situation instead of arguing about what happened when.
Then can you talk about how are you planning to do that? What is the structure of data being put in, etc. Yeah.
Talk about the structure of the data in notary chains, perhaps? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. You're at the very bottom, at the very lowest level. All you're really doing is recording a hash, and you're collecting that hash in a notary block. And
hello.
Hello.
1 second. Give me a second. I have a. Can y'all hear anything, or is it just me?
We can hear.
We can hear you.
You can hear me. All right. I had another call trying to come into my computer, and it was, Google ding-a-lings very distracting. Okay, so at the very bottom layer, you're just proving the existence of a digital artifact by taking that hash, placing it in a notary block, collecting a set of those, hashing them, and then that hash goes into the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Any hash that's in this notary block, none of them can be altered, because if any of them are altered, then it will no longer match the hash that's in the Bitcoin blockchain. Everybody follow me so far?
Yeah, basically you're using the blockchain hash like a Merkle root. And
yeah, absolutely, like a Merkle root for this block. And I mean, you could compute a Merkle root too, but there are reasons like handing individuals receipts and whatnot that make doing a linear hash a little more attractive than a Merkle tree. But in any case, so that hash will prove what's in the blockchain. Now, a lot of times it's not sufficient to just have a hash of a digital artifact because it becomes difficult to audit. And so what you need is some metadata around that hash. And so I allow you to put anything into a structured entry. And that structured entry is collected in blocks and distributed as well. But that structured entry gets hashed, and then that hash goes into the proof of existence layer, and then into a notary block, and then the hash goes out into the Bitcoin blockchain. So as long as I have the notary block and I have this entry, I can prove the hash of the entry, and I can prove that it's in the notary block, and I can prove that that's out in the Bitcoin blockchain. Everything's secured. Now, the entry allows me to put a hash to a digital artifact, but it also allows me to put metadata, like, for instance, a URL where you might be able to go and find the digital artifact, or a database key that allows you to go look it up in some database somewhere, or perhaps you're putting multiple artifacts and essentially bundling them together and saying this group of artifacts all go together, and I'm going to hash that and put that in I'm going to put those blocks in my entry. That'll get hashed. It'll go into the proof of existence layer and then back out to the blockchain. Now, once you can put metadata in an entry, you can chain those entries together. And if you chain those entries together, then the question becomes, what is a valid entry in that chain and what is not a valid entry in that chain? The typical solution in the cryptographic world is to say, oh, well, we're going to define what the rules are. If you are Bitcoin, you run the script, and the script tells you whether the next entry is valid or not. But if you want to do digital art, cryptographic smart contracts, get my terms right. I want to do a smart contract, and I want the kind of functionality that Ethereum provides me. Then I need to create my own blockchain because Bitcoin doesn't have that script, right? So instead of saying these are the rules for a chain, what we in notary chains, what I do is I say, this is how you create the first entry in your own chain, and in that entry for the head entry for the chain can include a link to some textual description of the rules. It can contain a hash of a source code to an application that will run an audit for that chain, and it can have a link to GitHub where you can find the source and any other information that you may want. And now entries that follow have to follow the rules that you defined in your chain. So instead of saying that every entry in notary chains has to follow my rules, I'm saying you can create a chain, you can define what rules you want to apply, and now every entry in your chain has to follow your rules. There will be some chain types that notary chains will handle natively, and those will include like a coin type with some parameters that allow you to do different kinds of coins. And there will be a rule set where you want to do a log, where you're just going to log data in some sort of linear chain. There'll be some other chain types that will support natively. But if you have a chain type that's your own, you get to specify that, and then you are responsible for auditing your chain and ignoring entries that don't follow your rules. And you have at the very beginning of your chain the opportunity to define how those how that audit will be performed, and all the entries then following have to follow your rules to be valid. And
if I could interject here, I'm just trying to understand the original source document, the Google Doc, where I say X, Y, and Z, and I want to prove that I said X, Y, and Z. So now I'm going to turn that, I guess, into a PDF, and once I turn that into a PDF, I get a hash of that PDF. The question then is, whose responsibility is it to maintain that PDF? So 22 years from today, if somebody wants to go back and track it through the notary chain, they say, that's the hash. But where's the original document, and who's going to keep it? And who's going to control that?
I expect that we will have archival services that run on top of notary chains that you can use. And MadeSafe could be essentially a place where those documents could live and be maintained. But I am only concerned with the hashes.
Okay.
So if you decide, if you burn your PDF and you no longer can create your PDF, you have the opportunity to lose. You know, the hash exists, but you may lose the opportunity to validate the content of that document, because you have to have both the document and the hash to do so, to validate a document. So no, I believe that the answer to that question, who keeps the document, is a responsibility of the user.
So let me ask you. You currently said you do have a small team. Have you actually raised money on some tokens that you've issued, or is there a plan to do something like that?
I have raised some money that has supported the project so far. We started in earnest a couple of months ago, so it's not really been that long. And
tokens of some coin, you just raised it in the traditional way of raising money.
Oh, well, from the DApps fund. They're keeping track of how much money they've put in. They're going to convert it to coins as soon as we've decided what those coins look like. So they've essentially done a pre-purchase. I'm Butterfly Labs of the notary coin world at this point.
So let me ask you this. Do you have, what's your first application for your entry app or something like that? Is there something?
There are a number of apps that we're looking at. There's a group out of Las Vegas that would like to create a system of record for titling, real estate titling. Turns out that this is kind of a process that when there's a dispute, everybody just grabs their big manila folders full of documents and tries to recreate, what the order of events was. And so they believe that they can create a digital database that's tracking titles through the system, and then they can use notary chains to prove, basically put down mile markers on events, so that later with discussions they can say, without any possibility of dispute, that event A occurred on this date, and event B occurred on this date, and event C occurred on this date, and then we titled and everything was good. And oh, by the way, these are all the appropriate documents for this process. They just believe that inserting discipline into that system is going to save them quite a bit. There are some discussions with Mastercoin to execute Mastercoin transactions on top of notary chains. Mastercoin transactions right now take about an hour to clear because they depend upon the order of transactions in the Bitcoin blockchain, and you really can't guarantee the order of transactions until you have about 6 confirmations, because any sort of reordering due to orphan blocks and that sort of thing will potentially change the order of transactions, and that matters to the protocol. So they're thinking that we can build a gateway of Mastercoin off of Bitcoin into notary chains where transactions can occur very fast, and then have a gateway that brings those Mastercoins back into the Bitcoin blockchain. And because some people just want to stay where they are in the Bitcoin world. So that's another application that I'm talking to, and there's several others.
Right. So you outlined them. If I could sort of present it as application categories, titling for one.
Right.
Blockchain transactions or microtransactions, for lack of a better word, in some senses, as another. So each of these will have their own sort of, let's call it, protocol that sits on top. I mean, you're just dealing with hashes, so they might have a mechanism by which they, as you talked about, some scripts, and there's a way to track the transaction history. So you're really building out an ecosystem of little apps that sit on top of the notary chain, or application categories, or something like that. Would that be?
Yeah. What I'm really trying to do is, instead of creating a blockchain to solve yet another thing I want to do, what I want to do is build a protocol stack like you have with TCP/IP, so that someone who wants to build an application doesn't have to create yet another blockchain and recruit yet another set of miners and have yet another coin, unless the coin really does them some good. Basically, if I look at most distributed applications, what I really need is a system of record that provides documentation of business processes in an auditable way, so that people can be rewarded for playing the proper roles in those applications. And I want to, with notary chains, create that place where people can keep those auditable records. But I also want to do it in such a way that if they wish those records to be public, they can be public. But if they want them to be entirely proprietary and private, even secret, then they can do that too. Because provable secrets is key to creating auditable processes. So let me give you another application, right?
Sure.
Suppose we wanted banks to be able to provide a cryptographic audit that proves that the audit reflects their business processes and the actual spends of funds on for various on various loans and various transactions, like dealing with foreclosures and all the other things that banks do, right? They've gotten into a lot of trouble because they can't prove, for instance, what led them to foreclose on a particular property, right? Well, let's suppose that we convince the government that we want banks to provide what they're doing all the way down the line for a property, from the point that that a mortgage has been issued, all the way to the point where they've decided to foreclose on the property and reacquire it. All right?
Right.
Notary chains can provide that for you, because all they really have to do is, at every step of their management of the property, including every payment that comes in, every letter that goes out, all they have to do is put the cryptographic signature into a notary chain, right? And they can encrypt it with the customer's private key, you know, assuming that the customer buys into this process that they're gonna have secure communications with their bank. So in their banking application running on their computer, they're receiving these these digitally signed. They don't have to be encrypted. Maybe they're encrypted. Is, you know, that's a security thing, right? But they're getting these digitally signed documents that are coming to them from the bank, and their entry is going into their notary chain. Now, when they go and they're foreclosed upon, and they say, well, we shouldn't have been foreclosed upon because the bank said X, Y, and Z. Well, now, if the bank really said that, they can't deny it.
That's right.
Now, will the banks and the financial institutions want to be that accountable? No, they don't want to be that accountable. But do we as consumers, voters, citizens in their country, users of banks, do we want them to be that accountable? Well, yes, of course we do. And so one of the big applications I can see for notary chains is to turn the tables on these cries for regulation and begin a conversation about, well, why don't we make banks and businesses and charities cryptographically, you know, provide for cryptographic audits, not just of their finances, but also cryptographic audits of their business processes, so that they can be held accountable when they do not comply with the regulations and rules for their organization and for their process. Well, they wouldn't like that, but honestly, we can provide that, and we don't even have to change their computer systems, because all they really have to do is inject occasionally a digital signature into a chain. It doesn't change any of their code. It's just the occasional logging of events as they go on.
That's not true, right? Because, I mean, they can put the signature on the chain, but what that signature actually reflects, that goes back to my original question of that PDF file or something, that has to be maintained in a pristine form so that you can track it back. So it's not it's not as simple as saying, hey, we just put this hash in. It's what does that hash represent? That's got to be maintained in the exact manner.
Well, but they're claiming they're doing that today.
Ah.
I mean, no, banks don't go to the government and say, no, we're not keeping records, we're throwing data away. No, they're not saying that, right? They're saying they're keeping these records, okay, and yet they aren't.
Okay.
And so the other thing that notary chains does in that very situation is it provides a proof of the negative. If they created the document and sent it, the customer can prove that the entry exists in the notary chain that has to do with their account, right?
That's right.
And they can't later deny that they sent it.
That's right. That's right.
And if they say, we never sent you a document, then somewhere in their chain there has to be an entry not accounted for. If all of them are accounted for, then the bank can say with total proof that they didn't send, you know, this letter that the customer is claiming they sent, because it's just not in the chain.
So just to play devil's advocate here, right? I mean, so I see how the blockchain can cryptographically solve such a problem.
Right.
But I don't see the value that notary chain specifically offers. I mean, if something like that were to be done, you could think of the titling chain or the bank record chain, archive chain. I mean, and the fact that the basic level everybody does a hash, what is the value, I guess, the unique value in having a notary chain for all of these different types of chains instead of just having a separate chain for each? I mean, that's the part I'm kind of a little, you know.
Well, I mean, I think I think that what I'm trying to do is build something so simple and so basic and so unobtrusive that I can claim that it's like TCP/IP. Is TCP/IP the only way you can exchange packets of data? Well, no. Obviously not. But do you have any real desire to go out and write TCP/IP alternative? No, because TCP/IP just pretty much works, and it doesn't get in your way. It does exactly what it's supposed to, and you're done, right? So I want to build a protocol that's just about that, unobtrusive. Do I think that my protocol will win over somebody else's that does, that follows that same mentality of being unobtrusive, fairly inexpensive, no huge tollway on business? No, I think we're not necessarily the only way to solve this problem, but I don't think that there's too many ways to solve this problem of providing a protocol stack for these kinds of applications.
I guess there are two parts. I could just fork your notary chains and run my thing. So
yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
Then I don't need your tokens, quote unquote. I sort of produce my tokens. I mean, you become more or less a standard library that can be used by all of these notary chain-like chains.
Yes, absolutely. Now, one of the things that I want to do is ensure that my transaction fees are much, much cheaper than Bitcoin. Okay, so at the very lowest level, at the proof of existence level, I want to be much cheaper than you putting a transaction into the Bitcoin blockchain, because I do think that the blockchain bloat is an issue, right? Okay. So now the question becomes, as you clone your data, do you pay more to put your hash directly into Bitcoin, or do you pay less to go to my service and get your hash put there, and then have essentially that one extra level of indirection? And if the answer is you're using that layer, you may not be sending a whole lot of transactions my way because you have that same 1,000 to 1 compression that I have. Your notary block throws a single entry my way every so often, and you get it logged into the Bitcoin blockchain. But you're still throwing some business my way. I think that what I'm trying to say is that if I architect my product well enough and sturdy enough and cheap enough, that I can throw away 90% of the market and still do fairly well.
You were saying that how do you make it cheaper than the Bitcoin transactions? You're saying that you are going to aggregate multiple documents into kind of like a notary block, and then produce hash from that block, and then put just that hash onto the blockchain, and then in those cases, it's how that's
yes. So you had what somebody else might do is put every hash that they want to secure out into the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And if they do that, then they're suffering a half a cent per transaction.
Right. Yes. And so in doing so, the block may contain document from different sources. From like say one source might. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
This is a somewhat tangential question to the direction the questions have been going in, but this has been bothering me a little bit in this conversation. So hashing the documents will certify the contents of the document, but not the origin of the document.
Right.
So what have you thought about sort of the design trade-offs between hashes versus HMAC versus signatures?
I think that you can do anything you like. I'm using hashes at the proof of existence layer, but let's say at the entry layer you would rather have a signature or whatever, then you get to put whatever you want to secure your document at the entry layer. So
I'm just thinking about the bank example. Okay.
Yes.
You think through the bank example. So like you have some sort of document that says that you paid your mortgage. Okay. So now the way you differentiate that document between so clearly the document existed, you generated the hash, but was that document's origin proper or fraudulent? Probably the way in which you have to adjudicate that is you probably want some sort of cryptographic key associated with who stated that this document was authentic, and that becomes the reference point for the authenticity of the document.
Well, the chain itself could be requiring the signatures of the parties to add to the chain, in which
That's
case,
true.
in
so
which case
that everything will be attested by at least and then you could just prove that in a court proceeding that I possess that wallet.
Well, you can prove, you can claim, an entry can say this is the public key of the bank, and you can have an appropriate document that backs up, that the bank is testifying that this is their public key, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking about how do you. There's probably a way of bootstrapping this into existence without having to. I mean, like this. I mean, we would all, you're starting, sometimes I'm starting to get documents from certain banks that are cryptographically signed, but it's still fairly rare, and every single time I get them, they're like typically using some weird signature scheme rather than just like normal things that we've used.
Like PGP or something.
Yeah, like I don't know why they seem to invent their own signature scheme every single time. And then you have to go to like some weird applet to verify their signature. But getting banks to use, but there might be a way of, essentially what you're doing is by attesting off of your personal credibility and then timestamping that credibility. There's it's in many ways this is like the non-repudiatability.
Right.
Aspect of this is really a very the ability to make non-repudiatable statements is a really exciting capability in terms of fraud management, because when you have ideally you would have chains of signatures in all documents that that would be like crypto paradise, but the crypto utopia is a long ways off, and so what we non-repudiatability is kind of like an intermediary step between utopia of everything is cryptographically signed on send and receive and we have like a well-established public key system to public key infrastructure is an intermediary step.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't disagree with you at all. And as you can tell, when I immediately said, well, the entry is totally under your control. My idea isn't to solve the issues of that particular problem or any other problem, but give you the general tools by which you can solve the problem how you care to or wish to. So as long as I'm not restricting you to a type of signature, and as long as I'm not restricting you to a single chain versus a multi-chain or general net or any other kind of organization you might want, as long as I'm not restricting you in any of those ways, then you can create the solution you need. And the real problem that you have with cryptography in the real world is the real world doesn't understand it. To me, I think cryptography is very simple, but it seems baffling to even people with computer science degrees, and I'm not really quite sure what that's all about.
Yeah, I don't know. I think either signed transactions into the notary chain that are recorded by the notary chain, or some HMAC format is probably what will probably give you both a combination of proof of existence and non-repudiatability that would give you a really nice set of properties.
Sure. But by HMAP you mean what?
So what I was thinking is you could, and this is I've been listening to you and this has been bubbling up in my head, so it's very
Sure.
Is what I was thinking was you could probably so you have let's see, you could So the question is like what would be HMAC is signatures is an asymmetric signature scheme. HMAC is a symmetric signature scheme where you have a shared secret.
Right.
So I'm wondering whether or not you would. I'm wondering whether or not you could create a shared secret between whether or not you could sort of create a shared secret in your net. I mean, so the advantages of HMAC over ECDSA is HMAC is a hell of a lot faster. And that I'm not sure whether or not that, like, if you wanted to sign, I don't know, the speed factor of HVAC is probably not relevant.
No, not really, because more than likely those entries aren't going to be validated in real time by the notary chain server. They're going to be user side validated with a specified app, auditor app, right? And
Yeah.
so it's only the people that care that want to run the auditor. And so you're not going to be doing it over and over and over again. So speed probably for your application won't matter too much.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Because in reality, as long as everybody's paying their mortgage, you get to the end of the 30 years, you have a party, you tear it up, burn it, and whatever, and you own your house. For those cases, you know, the notary chain did nothing for you except provide a auditable trail during the process, perhaps keeping the mortgage company or the mortgage-backed security honest. Okay, that's all it did for you. In the case that there's a dispute, then everybody has to go and validate everything and argue about it and all.
Yeah, I think that will work really well as long as you have some sort of public record of the signature of a signature that you can eventually attribute to some individual that inserted the hash into the notary chain.
Oh, well, absolutely. The bank would need to,
or the mortgage holder.
Yeah, the mortgage holder or the bank. Someone has to, you know, put it in and say, you know, I'm creating this chain. I would expect that in the scenario I gave you, I'm saying, well, we're coming up with technologies that actually allow you to do cryptographic audits of traditional banking systems, and you do.
Just I find the idea I find the idea of like just that mortgage application to be actually really compelling.
Yes.
Like that is something that could be a mass market consumer application. Like
absolutely.
Like you get papers in your mortgage, you set up this app, you feed the papers in, and we essentially log all of this stuff in a way that will protect you against disputes. Because this is the whole. This is like we broke the title system in the last decade in the United States.
Oh yeah.
We had a title system that was like the envy of the world in the United States for 200 years, and then we broke it.
Yep.
So that's a really interesting application.
Yep.
Okay, that was my point of view.
So my question again is, I agree with Zaki that it's an interesting, and I think there are many such interesting applications. But I'm just wondering, why can't they all effectively run? I mean, there are two things. So why can't they all effectively run their own chains, one? And two, why even have to be bothered with having the blockchain being, shall we say, the master repo of the master hash?
Okay, I guess you feel like it's too easy to do. It's not fun. You feel like putting something.
Because I think most of the work is going to be the application layer, and the value that the notary chain source is offering is fairly, trivial. I mean, I'm not saying it's trivial, but it's kind of at the end of the day not. So that's a part, and then the other. Your argument was that.
Well, let's stop there though. If most of the effort and most of the interesting work is at the application layer, why should the application bother with creating their own chain and trying to get miners and getting distracted by that? Because all of that is not the app. So that's my point. I mean, what I want to do is provide something that costs them far less time and energy to engage with, and
So
provide. Go ahead.
It's not the algorithms, but the fact that you've got an existing pool of nodes already operational. So as an application developer, I just sort of tap into the notary chain.
Yeah.
Pool already there.
Yeah, and it's not costing you as much, and you're just as secure as Bitcoin, so you're not fighting that again. Everybody that comes up, Namecoin, Peercoin, Ethereum, Darkcoin, all of these guys, they all have very, very good ideas about what they are doing. You know, they have an idea of how to do smart contracts or anonymous transactions or whatever else. You know, names DNS service and all that. But the question becomes, you know, is the goal to create yet another coin, or is the goal to does their application just need a system of record to coordinate the efforts in the application? See, I can imagine right now almost every application comes up with its own coin, and I'm not really any different than that, right? But I could imagine in not too distant future where a lot of applications don't need a coin at all. They just need to coordinate efforts between the parties involved. In which case, Notary Chains provides them a way of creating that system of record, documenting the interactions, and allocating some resources.
This was one of the arguments against sort of Ethereum, and the fact is the value of the transactions on the chain could be far, far greater than the actual value that is actually paid out to the miners or the node runners, if you will, for transactions. So if you think of this mortgage application, right, and if you think of notary chains, what's in it for the nodes that are already running these notary chains to keep them running? I mean, what's the profit motive that they have?
Well, there's just some very small transaction fees and some rewards in the early stages as we build up volume. But you get to the point where you're handling 30,000 transactions per second, and even if you're charging very, very little, you're still making plenty of money for to support all the infrastructure for the system. You know, it's like, how much would a credit card cost you if you didn't have to support the corporate structure, all the investors, and all the employees, and all of the architecture there, right? All they were doing, all you had was just your data center and some incentivized people that maintain some nodes. You know, it shouldn't cost that much. It's a matter of leveraging the efficiency of the architecture.
Do you have any documents that you put together where you go through some of the financial bits here, the number of transactions, the volume, what will happen 15 years from today, say where every bank uses you and I'm just curious because that seems to me the weak spot. I mean, I buy I buy the academic bits, I buy the value of the application, I buy all of that, but I just don't understand what notary chains brings to the table that's of value to the miners, which can be relatively easily done by the application. I mean, so that's the part I'm still not 100%. So that,
Well, the applications can't easily create a coin. That's the thing. If you need a ledger, you have to secure it somewhere. Now, every application could have their own blockchain, and then they could meter out essentially a transaction into the Bitcoin blockchain the way I'm doing it, right? They could do that, and that way they could secure their ledger and do whatever it is that they're doing. But it turns out that creating a chain that's capable of supporting a lot of transactions and has failover and is distributing the notary blocks and incentivizing people to audit and all that sort of thing, that process is kind of difficult to replicate. on a application by application basis. You know, I'm not really sure that it's that different than asking why do game developers use graphics libraries. I mean, they could write their own graphics libraries, right? But it's not necessarily where they see their value. You know, they want to employ their programmers to doing the unique things that makes their game a success in the marketplace. And
using that example, it takes a lot of man hours to develop good graphic libraries.
Right.
That's not true with the notary chain. It is not going to be that much of a significant effort to recreate the technology piece there.
No, it won't be hard to deploy the software, but you're going to have a network effect in getting the people involved to do the audits and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, maybe that's
well,
where
I guess the other thing is like I guess it seems easy to you because you understand the whole thing, and then but to a lot of people who are like outside of this community, they may not understand it, and then sometimes just they may think that that's a lot more efforts to them to do it. I don't.
Well, that is true. I mean, for instance, when I'm talking to the titling company, they just want to build their app and then they want to create their chain, and that's all they want to do. They don't want to get into creating a coin or anything like that.
Got it. I mean, I can see the value of having an existing network of nodes operational, so I can just, as long as the price is, really low, which it would be in this particular case.
Right.
So I think that sort of, yeah. So I don't know if I cut you off there. Do you actually have any documents?
Oh no, I mean I've worked through this a few times in some spreadsheets and stuff, but I haven't produced a document out.
I'd just be interested in seeing some of them just for my own curiosity, if ever.
I could try to do that. The biggest problem that I have with it is that there are a lot of variables, and so you end up with a lot of ranges of possibilities in the future. And I could produce a document that shows those ranges. And
I mean, you don't need to. I just was just if and when you do. You know?
Yeah. Well, we will be. We will be. This is part of our analysis. And right now I'm focused on getting the lower layers created, and they're less subject to this kind of analysis. But when I get into the federated servers and whatnot, I'm going to have to get there. I'm going to have to do that. Well, guys, go ahead.
I was just wondering, like you were saying that you might aggregate sources from aggregate document from different sources into the same block, and then so if that's and then create a hash and put just hash on the blockchain. So if that's the case, if they need to kind of prove that hash, prove the content of that hash, right? Wouldn't you need to build all these sources that were in that block, all the document in that block? Wouldn't you need to reveal all the document in that block in order to prove that hash content is that block? And that may be coming from different sources. Like one may be coming from a bank, and the other may come from another individual, another from a different company, or aggregate into a same block.
Well, I mean, in order to validate a document, you have to have a digital representation of it. And so if the user has these digital representations, they can certainly validate those documents later. Same way with the bank. And the bank can send those documents as digital documents. Like I get all my statements as digital documents today from my bank, for my bank account. So all of those things can go into that notary chain. I don't know how many ways I can say this, but the question becomes not really how someone might want to do, build an application. The question becomes, what do you want to do with your application? And while I'm talking to quite a number of groups about how they can build their applications, I'm focusing on creating the protocol layers of this system. So I don't want to restrict you in creating your application how you want to make your application run.
Got it.
So.
I think that was a really deep dive into notary chains. I think we're in it now.
Yeah.
Are there any links maybe that you could share with us that we can put up, or is it pretty much notarychains.com?
Yeah, notarychains.com, and the white paper's there. The team is discussed, and it has a link to the GitHub, and there you go. It's a good source to go find all things about notary chains.
So could you just give us a brief about your background before notary chains? You seem like part of...
Well, I wrote. I went to graduate school at Texas A&M for computer science and electrical engineering. I wrote the first PostScript clone to ship in a printer against Adobe. It shipped in December of 1987 in the Printware 720. That particular printer did all of its graphics in run length compression directly. Our programming team of myself and Cliff Click, and Clay Douglas, and Mike Parker, we wrote the operating system for the printer. We wrote the graphics routines and assembly for the printer. We wrote the Fifth-based development environment for the printer, and we deployed the PostScript and deployed the whole thing. We started in February of 1987, and the PostScript interpreter shipped in December. So it was quite the death march. We did very little besides PostScript for that year. I went ahead in 2000. I did some other things, but in 2000 I wrote a rules engine for the state of Texas. So all the eligibility determination for SNAP and TANF, these are food stamps and welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, those sort of programs. All the eligibility in the state of Texas and Michigan is evaluated on a rules engine that I wrote for Texas early in 2000. That approach to doing rules is embodied in an open source program project called DT Rules, and you can find dtrules.com and find all the source and all that sort of stuff. It's basically a decision table based rules engine, so it's very effective for executing policy, not so effective for doing random AI applications. In other words, it doesn't do reasoning. It just makes it easy to lay out policy in a way that can be evaluated and verified and validated. There you go. I mean, that's a rough idea. You can find my profile on LinkedIn. I'll add that to the notarychains.com website so that people can see my background. All right.
Do you have any questions for us?
Well, no, not really. I'm actually hitting a wall now myself at 6:30, so I need to run away from you guys. This was a whole lot of fun. I am looking for developers, so people that are looking for projects to work on in the cryptographic space, then this is one that is an option, and I'd be happy to talk to people. We have a very short runway, and I expect that we should do fairly well. in terms of being able to compensate people who are willing to take the risk of a startup. And that said, a lot of startups just don't generate any money at all. So we're not any different than that. No promises.
So thank you very much, Paul.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for your time. I know I appreciate it a lot. All of us here appreciate it, and I'm sure we put this up on YouTube, so down the line others can watch it too.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's keep in touch, and we'd be happy to come back with an update. And also, I would point out that my project's one of many projects that David is involved with at BitAngels. So you may want to get him to spotlight a few other projects in the future if you have a gap in your programming.
Yes, we will. We'll try and do that.
Oh, one last plug. I do also run the Texas Bitcoin Conference in Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. And the next one is going to be in March, the 27th through the 28th and 29th. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a whole lot of fun. We're going to be doing it at the Moody Theater where they film Austin City Limits. And so it's going to be a great venue downtown in Austin and a lot of fun. So
yeah, we'll sign up for it. Do put me on your email list or whatever, so when you do start out in notifications, I'll grab all of it.
All right.
Okay. So thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
Bye. Hi, Emmanuel.